Did you like him when you first met him?
No, I didn't like him at all. There's days he annoys me now. I've never painted myself to be anything other than who I am.
Paul Stanley might seem like the laid-back, easygoing frontman of Kiss, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Just because he's calm on the outside doesn't mean he hasn't harbored serious grudges against some artists over the years. He's even been known to influence bandmates being let go if his dislike ran deep enough. Some of the people he's hated, he's never even met. They're judged purely by reputation, hearsay, or the music itself. Starting our list, one name that might surprise you is Gene Simmons. Most people recognize him as the mastermind alongside Paul Stanley and Kiss, one of the most influential and theatrical rock bands in history. But before the fame, the makeup, and the screaming crowds, it all started with just two ambitious musicians, Simmons and Stanley, trying to make something out of the remains of their previous group, Wicked Lester. They were hungry for success, but the journey was far from easy. In those early days, Stanley wasn't entirely confident in Simmons' songwriting skills. He often felt that Gene's ideas lacked the melodic depth needed to stand out, and Gene, being as sharp as he was, could sense that tension.
It means a lot. It's a kind of if you're an athlete, it's your award.
The creative push and pull between them wasn't explosive, but it was there, a quiet rivalry rooted in pride and artistic vision. Each wanted to be the driving force, the one who defined the band's sound. However, what makes their story remarkable is how they didn't let that friction destroy what they were building. Instead, they learned to balance their strengths. Gene brought the business mind, the marketing genius, and the larger-than-life persona that would define Kiss, while Stanley supplied the heart, the voice, and the anthemic songwriting that gave the band its soul. Together, they became the perfect contrast, fire and steel working in harmony. When Ace Frehley and Peter Criss eventually joined, the chemistry finally clicked, turning their shared dream into a phenomenon that would conquer the world. The fact that Kiss lasted for decades, despite creative clashes and countless storms, is proof that even in rock and roll, vision and pragmatism can triumph over ego and rivalry. Yet the more serious challenges in Paul Stanley's career came from people outside his immediate partnership. One of the most notable rivalries he ever faced was with Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. The two bands, Aerosmith and Kiss, shared the stage on several tours, but behind the scenes, their relationship was far from friendly. Stanley's dislike for Tyler ran deep, shaped by years of competition and the clashing egos that naturally come with being rock icons. Both frontmen were strong personalities who wanted the spotlight, and that made harmony nearly impossible. Steven Tyler often mocked Kiss's flamboyant image, calling their style all show and no soul, a remark that stung Stanley, who had poured his heart into making every performance meaningful. For Stanley, Kiss wasn't just about makeup and fire, it was about passion, precision, and connecting with millions of fans. Tyler's dismissive attitude felt like an insult not just to him, but to everything the band stood for. The rivalry reached its peak during their joint tours, where audiences sometimes favored Kiss's explosive performances over Aerosmith's more traditional sets. That imbalance fueled Tyler's irritation and deepened Stanley's frustration. To Stanley, it was never about ego alone. It was about respect, and he couldn't stand seeing another artist belittle the music he had devoted his life to. That animosity didn't stop with Steven Tyler. It extended to other members of Aerosmith as well, most notably Joe Perry. With Perry, the rivalry took on a more band-oriented tone rather than a purely personal one. It stemmed from the core differences in how Kiss and Aerosmith viewed rock itself. Kiss believed in the power of spectacle, the makeup, the fire, the massive stage productions, while Aerosmith prided themselves on keeping the focus entirely on the music. To them, the showmanship of Kiss felt excessive, even artificial. This philosophical divide created constant tension whenever the two bands crossed paths. Each side thought the other was missing the true essence of rock and roll. Things eventually came to a boiling point in 1976 during a joint tour when a small disagreement between their road crews spiraled out of control. What began as a petty backstage argument turned into a shocking knife fight, marking one of the ugliest moments in both bands' histories. Although the altercation was short-lived, its emotional aftermath lingered for years. It solidified the sense of rivalry between the two groups and left Stanley wary of Aerosmith's camp. For him, that night symbolized how deep artistic pride and ego could cut, even in a world built on rock unity. At number 5 on Stanley's list is Richard Hell and his band, the Voidoids. Unlike the previous names, this wasn't about personal drama or direct competition. It was about pure artistic disdain. Stanley has always valued musicianship, the dedication to the craft of playing music well. For him, image and theatrics were secondary but necessary when combined with hard work and talent. What he found intolerable were bands who prioritized style over substance, particularly those emerging from New York's CBGB scene in the late 70s and early 80s. He didn't just dislike Hell's music, he hated it for what it represented. A trend where expression mattered more than skill, where attitude overshadowed talent. This kind of artistic philosophy went against everything Stanley believed in, and it made him vocal about his distaste. The animosity isn't always about style or ego. It's also about perceived betrayal or laziness. Paul Stanley has repeatedly clashed with bandmates, collaborators, and contemporaries when he felt someone wasn't pulling their weight or was undermining the collective effort. Professional jealousy, too, played a part in many of these tensions. During joint tours, Stanley often noticed the way audiences reacted, sometimes favoring Kiss over the other band or members. That dynamic, when coupled with perceived slights or passive-aggressive comments from fellow musicians, created an environment where grudges could thrive. Stanley's competitiveness wasn't petty. It was a reflection of his dedication to excellence and his unwillingness to accept anything less from the artists around him. He wanted bands, including his own, to perform at the highest level, and when he saw deviations from that, he didn't hesitate to voice his disapproval. It's worth noting that while some of Stanley's rivalries were deeply personal, others were more philosophical. He cared as much about the integrity of rock music as he did about the people playing it. The divide between style versus substance, spectacle versus skill, and passion versus complacency informed much of his criticism. For instance, the divide between Kiss and Aerosmith was never simply about personal dislike. It was a fundamental difference in how each band approached their craft. Kiss used theatricality as an extension of the music, while Aerosmith relied on musicianship as the backbone of their performances. That clash of ideologies made mutual respect difficult to achieve, even when tours placed them side by side. Despite these tensions, Stanley's grudges often carried lessons about leadership, accountability, and resilience. His ability to channel frustration into motivation helped Kiss endure over 5 decades. Where others might have burned bridges and walked away, Stanley found ways to navigate conflict while keeping the band moving forward. The animosity he held for certain artists, whether for stylistic disagreements, professional rivalry, or perceived betrayals, reinforced his commitment to his vision. It wasn't just about who he hated, it was about maintaining standards and ensuring that the art of Kiss remained uncompromised. Ultimately, the stories of the artists Paul Stanley disliked reveal a pattern. He demanded respect for the craft of music and for the hard work that underpins it. Personal animosity often followed, perceived slights or breaches of professionalism. Competitiveness, both on and off the stage, fueled rivalries that might seem surprising given Stanley's calm demeanor, but make perfect sense when you consider the stakes. The world of rock is intensely competitive, and Stanley's success depended on navigating not just the music, but the personalities around him. If anyone knows what it's like to face harsh criticism, it's Paul Stanley. Over the decades, he's been praised, adored, and just as often slammed by fans and fellow musicians alike. Few artists, however, have been so publicly at odds with him as Descender. What started as a small jab quickly turned into a heated feud. Descender, who grew up idolizing Kiss, wasn't shy about voicing his displeasure with the band's decision to let newer members wear the iconic personas. He called it insulting, embarrassing, even a betrayal of what made Kiss legendary. Stanley didn't hold back. For him, Kiss wasn't just a band. It was a carefully crafted mythology, a blend of image, spectacle, and legacy built over decades. Seeing it challenged like that felt personal. The clash with Descender was more than just ego. It was about defending something sacred. While Descender took a theatrical approach, poking fun and mocking the modern lineup, Stanley treated it with the seriousness it demanded. Beneath the verbal sparring was a deeper philosophical divide. Stanley saw the band as an evolving entity, something that needed to remain viable and relevant, even if it meant replacing players. Descender, by contrast, framed the issue as one of authenticity, insisting that no new member could ever match the originals without cheapening the history. That clash wasn't just juicy tabloid fodder, it made fans think about what mattered more: the preservation of a band's legacy or allegiance to its original members. The feud rolled on for months in the music press, fueled by barbed responses and theatrical jabs. Stanley defended Kiss's right to evolve, while Descender pushed the narrative that he was somehow threatened by the new order. It had all the hallmarks of classic rock drama. Two strong personalities guarding conflicting visions of legacy, each unwilling to compromise for Stanley, who had weathered dozens of lineup changes in Kiss. It was just another test of his patience and dedication to the band's enduring image. Then there's Vinnie Vincent, a name that represents a slow-burning backstage storm. When Vinnie joined Kiss in the late 70s, he was a virtuoso, a solution to sharpen the band's sound during a chaotic period. He could play circles around almost anyone, and at first, that dazzled the group. But talent alone wasn't enough to keep the peace. Vinnie's approach to solos became a symbol of something deeper. He often stretched rehearsed solos into personal showcases, disrupting the flow of the show. For Stanley, what might have seemed like a small creative quibble became a question of control, trust, and timing. Things escalated off stage too. Vinnie resisted formal contracts, demanded higher pay and status, and challenged the very rules that kept Kiss running as a touring machine. It all came to a head during a performance at Long Beach, where a solo ran so long Stanley had to signal him to finish. Backstage, tensions nearly erupted into a physical confrontation. The relationship, already fragile, dissolved into distrust, legal battles, and bitter arguments over royalties and rights. For Stanley, Vinnie's presence had become toxic, a wound that lingered long after the guitarist's departure. Even years later, when the band discussed final celebrations, Stanley drew a line in the sand. Vinnie would not be part of the farewell, a testament to the depth of the breach. Ace Frehley, the original spaceman of Kiss, holds a complicated and emotional place in Paul Stanley's story. In the beginning, their partnership was Electric Stanley, and Frehley shared a creative spark that helped shape the band's signature sound and fueled the wild energy that defined their early performances. On stage, they were unstoppable, a blend of power, charisma, and musical chemistry that made Kiss a global phenomenon. However, as the band's fame skyrocketed with albums like Alive, tensions began to rise behind the scenes. Frehley grew frustrated with the creative direction Kiss was taking. Feeling his ideas were being sidelined in favor of Stanley and Gene Simmons' vision, his decision to focus on solo projects only deepened the divide. When Frehley finally left the band, taking some of his songs and profits with him, Stanley felt it as a personal betrayal. It wasn't about questioning Frehley's talent. Stanley always admired his unique guitar work, but rather the timing and the way it fractured the unity they had built. Still, with time, Stanley learned to move past the resentment. Success and distance softened the bitterness, allowing him to honor Frehley's legacy with gratitude instead of anger. It became a powerful reminder that in rock and in life, forgiveness can sometimes matter more than pride. But there's one name on this list that Stanley has never been able to reconcile with: Peter Criss, the original Catman. While he has found peace with other former bandmates, Peter's actions left scars that time hasn't healed. Criss wasn't just a member who left, he was dismissed, the first of the original lineup to go. Stanley's anger isn't just about the act of leaving, it's about the attitude and the repeated behavior that showed a lack of commitment. In his book, Stanley describes Criss as consistently negative, maintaining an us versus them mentality, and living a life that felt one-dimensional and uninspired. The tension between Stanley and Criss started early and built up over time. Backstage arguments often escalated, sometimes dangerously. Criss even threatened other band members with a broken champagne bottle during one heated confrontation. On stage, his unpredictability disrupted performances, slowing down tempos or walking off mid-show, leaving Stanley and the rest of the band scrambling. Unlike past conflicts, these incidents happened in front of paying audiences, magnifying the frustration and forcing Stanley to maintain professionalism despite the chaos. Criss later admitted mistakes and acknowledged the impact of his actions, but Stanley never let his guard down. While other bandmates, including Ace and Gene, reconciled over time, Peter remained a figure of unresolved anger. For Stanley, it wasn't just about past disagreements, it was about protecting the integrity of Kiss as a band. The behavior he witnessed from Criss, both on stage and off, crossed lines that Stanley couldn't forgive. These rivalries reveal a pattern in Stanley's approach to conflict. He's not driven by pettiness or a desire for revenge. He evaluates the actions of others against his own principles and the standards he believes are essential for the success of Kiss talent alone doesn't earn respect. Dedication, reliability, and alignment with the band's vision matter just as much. When those expectations are violated, Stanley's response can be swift and unyielding, a reflection of the responsibility he feels as a steward of the Kiss legacy. The stories of these conflicts also highlight the challenges of maintaining a rock band over decades. Touring, recording, and performing at a high level demand cohesion, trust, and mutual respect. Disagreements, whether philosophical, personal, or professional, are inevitable. What sets Stanley apart is his ability to channel frustration into action, whether that means defending the band's brand against critics, navigating internal disputes, or making hard decisions about who remains part of the lineup. At the heart of these stories is a central theme: the balance between loyalty and artistic integrity. Stanley's feuds were never just about ego, they were about protecting the standards that made Kiss legendary. Whether confronting Descender's critiques, managing Vinnie Vincent's unpredictability, dealing with Ace Frehley's departure, or coping with Peter Criss's unreliability, Stanley consistently prioritized the long-term viability and creative vision of the band. Even the most intense rivalries carry lessons. In some cases, time and perspective soften the edges, allowing former adversaries to reconcile or at least find mutual respect. In others, like with Peter Criss, the wound remains a permanent reminder of what happens when trust and professionalism break down. For fans, these tales add depth to the persona of Paul Stanley, not just as a frontman, but as a guardian of a cultural legacy, a man navigating the messy human side of rock and roll. By examining the artists Stanley has had conflicts with, it becomes clear that his grievances are principled rather than personal. He respects skill and dedication, and he rewards loyalty. When he sees behaviors that undermine the band, whether on stage or behind the scenes, he reacts decisively. These decisions, whether celebrated or criticized by fans, reflect a broader philosophy. The band's integrity comes first, and personal feelings must sometimes take a back seat to the greater mission. Through decades of challenges, Stanley has remained a constant, ensuring that Kiss continues to thrive despite lineup changes, rivalries, and outside criticism. The feuds, from Descender to Peter Criss, show the range of obstacles he's faced, from artistic disagreements to outright personal betrayals. Yet each confrontation also demonstrates his dedication to music, his sharp instincts for leadership, and his commitment to a legacy that has endured for more than 50 years. Ultimately, Paul Stanley's list of rivalries and feuds tells a story of a man who demanded excellence, both from himself and those around him. Whether it's defending the brand of Kiss, managing the chaos of bandmates, or standing up to critics, Stanley's approach is consistent. Respect the craft, honor the fans, and never compromise on the vision. It's a high bar, and it explains why, even after decades in the business, he remains one of rock's most respected and formidable figures. From heated public spats to backstage confrontations, Stanley has faced every type of challenge imaginable.
I'd like to see that work ethic manifested in all my kids. If anything, I want to lead by example. Your kids aren't really taken with what you tell them, but they're more taken with what they see.
Some relationships healed, some left scars that never faded, and some taught lessons that shaped the band's evolution. These stories don't just reveal the artists he disliked, they reveal the values he stands for, the principles that guide his leadership, and the unwavering passion that has kept Kiss alive and relevant for generations. And there you have it. The artist Paul Stanley has had the most notorious conflicts with, the rivalries that tested his patience and shaped his journey. Some were based on ideology, some on personal friction, and some on pure professionalism. But all of them show the complexities of working at the top of the rock world. While some feuds cooled over time, the lessons endured. And for Stanley, protecting the legacy of Kiss always came first.